Hey folks, this is Joe Rule with the Bold Visions podcast, where I interview people who work with disruptive technology about how they use the power of storytelling to make vision into reality. As always, this episode is sponsored by Raconteur Animation, and show notes and links for the episode can be found at raconteuranimation.com/podcast. Today on the show, I spoke with Keith Moore. Keith is the CEO for AutoScheduler.ai, and as a supply chain pro to know, Keith works with consumer goods, beverage, and distribution companies to drive efficiency in their distribution centers. As the CEO, Moore's focus is in creating the future with prescriptive warehouses. Moore was voted by Hart Energy Magazine as an Energy Innovator of the Year in 2020. He was selected as a Pi Kappa Phi 30 under 30 member and holds multiple patents in the fields of neural architecture search and supply chain planning. Moore attended the University of Tennessee, where he received a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering. In this episode, we talk about Keith's background and his first journeys into entrepreneurship as a kid and college student and how he got started in machine learning. He also shares how they were able to build trust and a reputation in the supply chain world when AutoScheduler was still a young and untested company. And then towards the end, we touch on his vision for AutoScheduler and the kind of the current environment for startups here this was recorded in 2023. So grab a snack, maybe go for a walk, and hope you enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with Keith Moore. Keith, thanks for coming on the show. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
I really appreciate it. So I thought we would kick it off with you could introduce yourself and then talk a bit about your background, specifically with National Instruments and Spark Cognition, and talk about what you did at those places and kind of how that ultimately how you came to birth AutoScheduler and where those ideas came from.
Sure. So it's, I guess by training, I am a mechanical engineer. I'm from Tennessee, so I went to the University of Tennessee, based here in Austin. It's the wrong UT, according to a lot of people, but I even went into getting an engineering degree knowing full well I wanted to move into startups. That was kind of my passion. I was the kid that would like go buy pizza in high school, go sell it in the cafeteria for $1 a slice at, like Little Caesars $5 pizzas. And so I always knew I wanted to get into startups. I knew I probably wasn't going to be the best engineer out there. Went and got the degree, started working at National Instruments. I actually started my first company while I was at National Instruments, which was in fantasy soccer. It was right when daily fantasy sports was starting to get pretty promising. The company, grew, bootstrapped, didn't ever get funding, had a decent user base, weren't profitable, but were growing, and were shut down by the Attorney General on gambling. So didn't want to fight that one. Decided, hey, I should probably learn how to do this effectively, do this well. And while I was at National Instruments, one of the things that I learned is part of what NI does is they make sensors, and sensors produce a lot of data. And I was working with companies like SpaceX on testing some of their rocket componentry and some of their control systems. And we're producing just through the data acquisition space, gigabytes to terabytes of data constantly. And what I learned when you're talking to these customers, like none of them are actually using all of the data. They're downsampling, they're taking averages because there's just too much data for them to actually be able to comprehend. And I was like, it'd be cool if there were analytics that actually help them capture the nuance in data that we're giving them, because it's extremely valuable if looked at appropriately. It was when this was in like 2013, 14, kind of stumbled into the machine learning space. At that point, I was one failed startup deep, a million ideas in, and was like, hey, I should probably learn how to go do this. It'd be cool if I focus on this thing that's up and coming called machine learning. And so I targeted a company in Austin called Spark Cognition as the company I wanted to go work for. I met with the CEO, Amir Hussain, still CEO. He's one of the smartest people I've ever worked with in my life. And fantastic guy, does a lot for the Austin community. And I went and joined them as a product manager, through a pretty rigorous interview process. became one of the first folks there, focused on machine learning, did that for about 5 years, and realized when you're in a pure play AI startup, and I'm using air quotes for folks that can't see it, right? AI means a lot of things to a lot of people. What you end up doing is you get the hardest analytics problems for any company and they throw them at you, meaning it's really hard to productize first and foremost. And so I'm the guy who's responsible for all the product at the organization. And we're being asked to build a lot of different tools for a lot of different people. And you have a decision to make, which is, do you want to go vertically deep into a few fields and sell that same thing consistently? Or do you want to solve these big problems that are massive services projects where a lot of the componentry you've built is going to scale, but it's not as copy paste as, if you're selling a Microsoft Word. And so ended up doing a lot of cool things in energy, automotive, finance, but wanted to do something that was really vertical. So do one thing excellently, consistently. And it was about that time my dad actually reached out to me. So he had been in supply chain my whole life, longtime veteran of the space. And he said, hey, I'm doing a lot of work with this company called Procter & Gamble. We've built this tool for them at my consulting firm called AutoScheduler. Does it have any value? Is it something that could actually be scaled elsewhere? So I came in kind of as a venture capitalist would, did due diligence on the solution, did due diligence on the space. I obviously knew the logistics space just having grown up in it. And came to the conclusion there was a whole company that could grow out of this idea and this initial POC. So did that. We launched AutoScheduler in August of 2020. So we're almost 3 years old. And have very quickly scaled that business in the logistics and warehousing space. So it's probably more than you're looking for, but that's kind of a little bit about how we got where we are today.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you. So you're 3 years in now. And you started out with that kind of one giant customer with Procter and Gamble. Where are you guys at right now? Then what does the playing field look like?
It's a really interesting space. So logistics technology has gotten extremely popular since COVID, which I think the whole world knows, right? It's gone from a cost center to a boardroom conversation at most big companies. But what we do as a business, and without having the time to get into all the nuance of different software and the intricacies of how a logistics network at big shippers works. Just suffice to say, there are a lot of core componentry software pieces that make up any total logistics network for a Procter and Gamble or a Unilever or a Nestle or any of the big companies you work with, like an Amazon or a Walmart, right? They all have a network. They all have different pieces of software they buy. What we do at AutoScheduler is we focus very specifically on distribution and warehousing, meaning if it is anywhere that you store, cross-dock, move, touch product on forklifts with people, where you have to manage labor, you have to manage workflows, you have to manage things coming in and things going out, we want to touch it and we want to optimize it. So our whole platform at AutoScheduler is, can we take all of the inputs, basically, what is all the work you have to do? How many people do you have to do it? How much space do you have? What inventory do you already have? What are the time critical components, meaning I have to ship this outbound to a Walmart at this time. How can we take all of that in and can we provide the brain for the operation? And that brain basically says, here is exactly how you need to distribute all of your people at every point in time and exactly what they need to be working on to make sure your warehouse becomes a true, kind of a node in the chain. So inventory flows in and flows out exactly as it's expected. There's all sorts of problems in supply chain where you say, well, this shipment was late, and why was it late? It's very rarely because there was a storm or a traffic jam that causes things to be late in the supply chain. It's because you can't unload things at the port, or that warehouse had a big issue where they were running 12 hours late, and so the truck didn't get on the road for them to meet their appointment at the destination. And so our whole goal is to really streamline operations inside of distribution centers. And given that niche we play in, we're still the only, to answer your actual question, we're still the only company that's focused on that.
Okay.
The market will catch up soon, though. So we're moving at light speed to try to grow.
So that's an interesting reframing, because I was imagining it from the perspective of you guys were managing the position of assets, so like position of packages essentially, but you're actually managing tasks, or you're managing human resources. You're not managing the the shipments themselves. Then is that correct?
Correct. And this gets into, and this is something worth knowing about supply chain or anybody who wants to get into this space, is that there is a huge amount of innovation, but there is also a huge amount of legacy software that is running. And when legacy software is running something as mission critical as a supply chain, nobody's willing to put it on hold for 6 months so that you can get a new system put in. So generally what you're able to do, and what most companies try to do, you use the expression of you're changing the tire while you're driving down the freeway, is that most companies are trying to do that with all of their different software pieces. And these software components end up creating very unique constraints on the network that you have to work around. And so, you're right in that we today are not managing it. We don't have any control over what ships out of a site or what ships into a site, even, because there are different software pieces that manage that as a part of the broader network. What we do with our tool is say, if you draw a big circle around any distribution center and you say, I need to know what's coming in and I need to know what's going out, here are all the things we have internally, black box, go figure out the best way to make it work. We figure out how to make it work. So it really is that execution planning you had mentioned.
Okay. And so therefore their tools would actually fit inside of the larger bubble or the box the AutoScheduler creates. So it's synergistic with existing systems then.
Yeah. And that's the best way in supply chain to sell, is you want to be in addition to, you do not want to be in replacement of. Because in replacement of, your sales cycles once every 5 years, once every 10 years, maybe even once every 20 years. Some people don't upgrade software that often. And in the rest of the world where software as a service is common, right? Salesforce, you look at anything. When we started the company in 2020, one of the big warehouse software providers, their slogan was never upgrade again, because they were just moving everybody to the cloud. And
Right.
yeah, I don't know if I can swear or not, but I came in and was like, what the expletive are you talking about? The rest of the world's been doing this for 20 years. Supply chain is just now catching up. But in particular, warehousing is, because it is so mission critical, it's really hard to convince people to rip and replace systems. So complementary is always valuable.
Yeah, for good reason, for sure. So touching on the kind of like the sales and communications piece of it, what's been the biggest obstacle for you going to somebody, like we were just saying, they're very resistant to change? How have you been able to bridge that gap and get them to understand the value of embracing this change and whatnot?
Yeah. So our first 2 years were pretty much exclusively focused on awareness. And I had something when we started the company. I told our whole leadership team, I want to be able to pass. I call it the bar test. There's probably an actual term for this somewhere, but it's the Keith Moore bar test for me, which is I want to be able to sit in a bar when somebody asks where I work. I say, oh, I work for a company called AutoScheduler, and they say, oh, I've heard of them. Can you tell me about this component of the business, or can you tell me how you guys are doing? And it took us about 2 years to get there for me to actually be able to sit at a bar and say, I work for this company. And so he's like, oh, I work in supply chain. I've heard of AutoScheduler. But we spent almost all of our money in the marketing side and sales side on just awareness, meaning, I, as the CEO, before we hired a sales team, and a few of our managing partners did all the sales for the business, all of our budget went to understanding where people get their informed information from, meaning who do people trust for information, and how do we make sure that the people they trust are talking about us. So what we ended up doing is, our initial strategy was, Well, people trust hearing from what other big companies are doing. We're fortunate in that P&G was a first customer of ours, and we could actually leverage some case studies with P&G. So we were able to do that. But then there's also in supply chain a few analyst communities where if they say it, everybody listens. And so we spent an exorbitant amount of money on being a part of that research group so we could actually get feedback from these analysts. And during the feedback sessions, be able to brief them on, hey, well, here's what we're seeing with these customers, and here's where we think the market's going. And over the year and a half, 2 years, instead of us being people that were just getting informed, the analysts actually started to write about things we had talked about. Mm-hmm. Meaning, if I go to a customer or I go to any big consumer good, my customers are Fortune 200 companies. If I go to them and say, hey, my name's Keith Moore, I feel like I'm pretty smart, you guys should listen to me, nobody will listen to me. Mm-hmm. But instead, making sure you understand where they get their information from and actually making sure that the information is messaged appropriately through those sources, it takes a lot of time and skill. And I'm really thankful to have a great CMO named Ginger Stegmeyer, who's kind of helped guide us on that path. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does, for sure. And it's, it's a different tactic than I've heard of before so far. But it's cool, to kind of appropriate the trusted voices within a market. And once you have that, then, you can start building trust with everybody ultimately. It's really
cool. I will add one additional thing, which is, and I recommend every small company do this, and I never would have thought we were this size, but I actually hired somebody for PR. And I didn't hire an internal PR person. I hired somebody who was an industry-specific PR person who knew all of the analysts. She knows all of the people that are writing articles. She understands what their schedule looks like. And to where, at this point, I'm probably in an article a week or have written an article a week, me or ghost written article a week. It's probably not a week. It's probably one every 2 weeks. But and that's all just to having a really good PR group that understands what we do and getting our name out there and understands that we're kind of at the cutting edge, which finally, so many years of effort have paid off and it's sexy now.
Gotcha. So what is now when you walk into a C-suite pitch or something like that, what's that look like now that you have all of this energy behind you?
It's a heck of a lot easier, right? In the VC world, right? Money follows money. Same in supply chain with sales. They say, hey, can you show me why we should work with you? And I can, show them a list of the top 25 consumer goods companies and say, hey, half of these guys are my customers and I'm contracting with the other half. Do you want to join? It's a much easier sale than, hey, we built this thing. It worked really well at one company. Maybe it'll scale to you.
Right. And therefore take a chance on us.
Right.
With an N of one.
But it's also our whole mentality. Sorry, and I'm talking about the marketing and sales side a lot because that's kind of where the line of questioning is. But our mentality as a business is we will lose a sale to make sure an existing customer is supported and successful. And so every customer we sign up with, we cannot allow for churn. If they say we need to get something and we know it's within our power to get there, we will bend over backwards to make our customers successful because that success is what allows us to actually go and say, hey, we're working with all these people. It's about walking the walk more than talking the talk.
Yeah. And I think that's just an important mindset in general in business to have to support existing customers above the new sale, even though new sales can feel better sometimes.
Well, you look at the past 5 years of kind of VC dominated companies and you don't see that. So we're bootstrapped still, which is why I can do that, right? If the only people that yell at me for not hitting sales goals are people on my team, and we can have a good conversation about it. Whereas when you're pushed by a lot of venture companies, at least 2 years ago, you were being pushed for growth and sales and bookings. And now it's like, wait, now you need to be profitable. And you're like, wait a second, I built my whole company on bookings, not profitability. Now you're telling me I need to be profitable. And that's what, you've already seen it, but over the next 18 months, so many companies are going to fold because of that.
Yeah. It's part of the the great cleansing.
It's unfortunate because there's a lot of really good people that are losing jobs because of it.
Yeah,
There's a lot of really smart people in the startup community, and you hate to see it.
for sure. Yeah, it's never, well, it's the first time that I've seen it, but I've heard and read about it in
Yeah.
the past couple sort of cycles. So yeah, what's the future look like for you guys then? What's your 3-year, 10-year goals look like?
Yeah, big. We've, we're still a startup, right? So almost every goal is cash flow oriented. Our 1-year goal is hitting profitability because we're investing, our own money still in the business. We're pretty close, so I'm not super worried about that one. But then 3 years is how do we use that to fuel growth? We are currently the only company in the niche we play in, right? That complementary piece for warehousing software. And so how quickly can we step on the gas pedal? And our strategy for doing that is we're going to find the biggest vendors in the space who sell software in warehouses, and we are going to partner with them. The easiest way to box out competition is make sure all your competition knows how easy it is to work with you. And so we are investing really heavily into partnerships with all the major players to say, hey, don't even try to build it. We'll work with you to make sure that you win if we get to work with you, and the customers will win at the end of the day. So 3 years, it's going to be all about growth and sales. 10 years, that's when you start to talk about starting to eat into other markets. So we're already moving into Europe at this point, potentially APAC, certainly Latin America. But even 10 years from now, you're talking about expanding a little bit further into different components of warehousing. You're talking about getting into things like appointment scheduling, other niche software types in and around the warehouse.
Okay, cool. And so talking about your, again, that long-term vision, what, maybe I'll frame it around the bar test again. In that like 10 or 20 year mark, when somebody brings up the name in the bar, what do you want the ethos around the AutoScheduler name to be, and what impact do you want to be having at that scale?
Our goal is to change the way people run distribution sites today. And you could use every buzzword in the book around just about any startup, right? And that's completely, so I could give you that pitch, but it's also, you look across every other function in supply chain. So the broadest software that most companies run is called an ERP. Like SAP is the biggest player in that space, and everybody knows SAP. Most companies have one ERP that runs their whole network. One level down, if you think about getting closer to the second by second execution of who hands a package to where, is the transportation side of things. And transportation, it's called a TMS, Transportation Management System. Most companies only have one in their network that runs all of the transportation and freight booking across their network. However, by the time you get into warehousing, just based on how the warehousing landscape runs, every unique site has its own warehouse management system, which is the software that runs a warehouse or distribution site. And so if I have 250 sites like a PepsiCo would, just in North America, I have 250 systems, and there are 5 to 10 people per shift that are sitting on the site making sure that system is running and everybody's doing what they're supposed to do. It's about time that the warehouse goes the way of the rest of supply chain software, and that you can centralize a lot of that planning and optimization of all of your different sites in one location and have a team of maybe 5 to 10 people managing 200 to 250 sites. And so that's our objective, and that's something that wasn't possible in warehousing until a solution like ours came about.
Do you see that integrating with robotics as well? So that I see that so many companies now are working around logistics and warehouse robotics systems.
Oh yes, we a lot of our customers are running robotics, and a lot of them have a 5 to 10 year plan to automate a lot of the function, and that's not because they want to replace people. That's because they can't hire the people they need to actually do the job to begin with. And so We already do that today. So we have sites that are running a lot of different robotic components to perform different functions. And part of what we're doing is we're optimizing those components to work together more seamlessly.
Okay. What so in looking at that long term, the vision, what do you think is going to be your biggest obstacle to get there?
It's the Donald Rumsfeld unknown unknowns right now that I'm guessing is actually going to be the biggest obstacle. Somebody's going to come up. There's going to be a competitor. There's going to be headwinds. The market's already getting worse for a lot of startups. Luckily, that hasn't impacted us yet. That doesn't mean it won't. So right now, I think a lot of it's just going to be execution and scale. You can do a lot of things incorrectly when you're trying to scale a business, and I'm fortunate enough that at Spark Cognition, I learned how to go from 5 guys in a shoebox to 400 people. But that doesn't mean every step of the way was perfect. And so for us, it's really going to be, how do we make sure we're providing the level of support we need for our customers and growing our customer base as smoothly as we possibly can, and doing all the right things along the way. And I haven't said it on this, but my leadership team is fantastic. So I've surrounded myself with people that are all smarter than me. So I'm very confident we'll be able to do it.
Awesome. How big is the team right now? Remind me.
Yeah. So, oh God, somebody starts on Monday. I'm gonna ballpark and say about 25 folks.
Okay.
We'll say 25 plus or minus 3 or 4. But we're constantly growing. We have a few open positions right now, and hope to have more by the end of the year.
Awesome. Well, yeah. Do you have anything to ask of the audience? What are your needs right now? You could put the word out to people. What are you looking?
Yeah. So right now, I'm looking for somebody who is a supply chain and software as a service sales professional to join our team. But I'm guessing 3 to 6 months, we'll also be hiring somebody on the demand generation and marketing side of the world. So given kind of the focus there, we will need how supply chain works is most purchasing cycles are in Q1, Q2. And so we spend a lot more of our marketing time and budget in Q1, Q2. So I'm guessing by Q4, so calendar year Q4, we will probably be hiring for somebody in that particular type of role. So if anybody's interested in working in supply chain and learning a lot and having a lot of fun, please reach out.
Awesome. Well, thanks again so much for coming on, Keith. I appreciate it. And yeah, it was great to learn more about what you guys are working on, understand a little bit better. So
thank you for having me.